In this video, I'm going to show you how to get oriented and started with the heart of the Roland System 100 here, the Model 101 synthesizer, which is this unit here in the middle. If you're new to synths and you want to get a grip on the basics of subtractive synthesis, this machine's a really good place to start. It has a clear layout that makes the basic elements and signal flow that are common to subtractive synthesis easy to understand and to start to get a handle on. This synthesizer and the other component parts of the system were produced in Japan from 1975 to 1979. And the System 101 here is an analog semi-modular synthesizer. So what that means is that it has an internal fixed signal path that can be overridden by using patch cables. It's different in that way to a fully modular synth where patch cables are essential. This machine can do a lot without having to need any patch cables whatsoever. The 101 is a monophonic subtractive synth. It has a built-in keyboard, a single oscillator, an audio mixer, a noise generator, high-pass filter, voltage-controlled low-pass filter, and a VCA are the basic components, along with an envelope generator and a low-frequency oscillator. This machine, as I said, is very easy to use. It has a classic sound, and it's great for all kinds of single-line melodic ideas, as well as some basic percussion hits and sound design stuff as well. So if you're sitting in front of the machine and you want to get started, the basic state that I have the machine in here will get you this basic starting sound. In the design of the panel here, they try very hard to make the components of the machine very clear, as well as the signal path very clear. So when you're looking at it, you can see that each of these sections here that is painted blue indicates a different module of the synthesizer. So you can see all the separate modules very clearly. Also, we have these red-orange lines here that indicate the audio pathway of the signal as it begins at the oscillator, passes through the mixer, the two filters, onto the amplifier, and then finally through to the outputs over here. Likewise, these white lines indicate the control signal pathway. So from the envelope generator and the low frequency oscillator, we can feed the control signals that these modules generate into different parts of the synthesizer as indicated by the white lines. To get oriented with this synthesizer, we always would start here at the oscillator and move across to the right-hand side. That's how we would kind of read this synth. So the oscillator is where the sound begins, and then we move across to this way through to the output. Okay, let's quickly go over the basic state and look at where you need to have all these dials and switches set to get this basic sound. So beginning over here, the power's on, of course. The headphones aren't being used, so we have the level turned down to 10. The glide section here, we just have the auto glide switch to off. Then coming across to the envelope generator, the attack is set to 0, the decay is set to 5, the sustain is set to 10, and the release is set to 0. Down here, this switch is set to keyboard gate. Then coming across here to the low frequency oscillator, the rate control is set to 0 and the waveform is set in the middle position, this switch, to the sine wave. The keyboard voltage control module here, the portamento, is set to 0. Then coming across to the oscillator, we have the fine tuning and frequency knob set to 12 o'clock, straight in the middle here, and the waveform is all the way across to the left on the triangle waveform setting. Then these controls along the bottom here, external CV and LFO, are both set to 0, and the pulse width mod, pulse width control here is set to 5. Coming over to the audio mixer, the external input is set to 0, the VCO input is set to 10, and the noise input is set to 0. And on the noise generator here, has two modes for the switch that is set to pink. Then we come across to the filter module here. The high pass filter control is set to 0. The VCF cutoff frequency here is set to 10, and the resonance control is set to 0. These switches along the bottom here, let's set this switch into LFO for the external control. We'll get to that later. And this fader here that feeds that into the filter is set to 0. Keyboard CV is set to 0 and ADSR is set to 0. Lastly, we come here to the voltage controlled amplifier. The initial gain is set to 0. the LFO is set to 0, and the ADSR control here is set to 10. And of course, the standard oscillator here is switched to the off position as well. So if you have gone through and set up all those basic settings, it gets you that basic starting sound. Okay, let's have a look now at some of these modules, their controls, and how you can use them to change the sound. Let's start off with the oscillator, of course. We have the waveform control, which chooses the basic quality of the sound. So we have the triangle wave, sawtooth wave, square wave, and a pulse wave. And the pulse width control here allows you to change the sound of the pulse wave to get different timbres. Then of course we have the frequency and fine tuning controls. The thing about the Model 101 is that the keyboard isn't automatically in tune. We in fact have to tune this synthesizer up. It's very easy to do though, because we have this standard oscillator module over here on the side, which when we switch it on will give us the note A at 440 Hertz. So to get the synthesizer in tune, we would turn on the oscillator, we'd play A. Let's go back to the triangle wave, and we basically then would use the main frequency control to match this sound. Okay, and we use the fine tuning control here. To get that spot on. If we wanted a sound that was either a higher melody sound or a lower bass sound, well then we would still use this pitch, but just dial the frequency down to the correct and required pitch. So let's do that now. We'll start here. We can go down 1 octave. Right, we go down another octave. Right, and use the fine tuning here just to get rid of those little beat tones. And we're looking good. Okay, let's have a look at the audio mixer now. So it's a very basic 3-channel mixer. We can feed in an external input through this mini jack here. The output from the oscillator, of course, comes through into the mixer as well. And lastly, the output from the noise generator also comes into the mixer here. And we have the choice between pink or white noise. And we can use noise sometimes when we're creating sounds, sometimes to make percussive sounds for some sound design things, also to add a little bit of grit or texture to the sound. Next, let's move on to the filter module here. So we have the high pass filter cutoff frequency and the low pass filter, voltage controlled low pass filter cutoff frequency. In order to demonstrate these sounds though, I'm going to change the waveform here to a square wave, just because it's a richer, more harmonically richer sound, and it'll be easy for us to hear the filter in action. So if we control the high pass filter here, we will hear the low frequencies cut out, but the high frequencies pass through like this. And vice versa, if we control the cutoff frequency for the voltage controlled low pass filter, we hear this. If we want to emphasize the cutoff frequency, that's where we would use the resonance control. So we would get this. And without the resonance control. Then we can move on to the voltage controlled amplifier here. So as you can see at the moment, the voltage controlled amplifier is receiving its instructions from the envelope generator. This initial gain control here is much like a volume control on any amplifier, and that when we simply turn it up, we can hear whatever signal is being passed through into the amplifier. So if we have this set up and this set down, we'll still hear the notes change, but we won't hear the actual effect of the envelope changing the volume over time. So if we turn the envelope generator back up and have it control how the amplifier behaves, it'll take the instructions from over here and give us an envelope with every note that we push. Okay, let's have a little look at the specifics of the envelope generator. So we have these four basic controls: attack, decay, sustain, and release. So we can use the attack here. If we want a slower attack, we add more time and we get this effect. If we wanted a longer release, we would do the same and we would get something that sounds like this. If we wanted to have a percussive little plucky sound, we could turn all of these down and then use the decay. Until we get a nice short plucky sound. We could also add a little bit of release in there to give that sound a bit of tail. Maybe a touch more. So we get a nice plucky attack with a kind of long sort of release tail there. Let's put these back to where they were before. So attack at 0, decay at 50, sustain at full, and release at 0. Okay, now let's have a little look about how you can use the envelope generator to feed into other parts of the synthesizer to change the sound. First off, I'm just going to take the filter here and dial it down, add a little bit of resonance in. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the envelope into the filter controls here. So as I turn up this dial, it's going to take the information from the envelope generator and have it control the cutoff frequency of the VCF here. So we have a little listen to how that behaves as we dial it in. Maybe let's add a little bit more release to the sound. Okay, so we could of course dial that out again. Okay, and back in again. Okay, so it gives a little bit more expression to the sound as the envelope controls both the behavior of the filter and the amplifier as well. Lastly, let's just have a quick look at the low frequency oscillator and how it can control the filter. So I'm going to turn down the envelope now, and I'm going to introduce the low frequency oscillator into the filter. So again, if we follow our white line here, we can see that the signal travels from the low frequency oscillator. It can go up into the voltage controlled oscillator, but here we're going to bring it through this switch and on this dial in to control the cutoff frequency for the VCF. And that sounds like this. The low frequency oscillator is running at quite a slow rate. So if we want to speed that up, we would just increase the value of the low frequency here. And of course you could use this manually as well as having this working at the same time to get you a little bit of an effect like this. Okay, so that can be used again to give you a little bit more expression. Of course, you could change up the speed of the frequency as well to give you a really tremolo style effects. So a lot of fun and a really great sound. I would encourage you when you're mucking around and experimenting with this machine to look at different ways that the envelope can be fed into the filter and our low frequency oscillator can be fed into the voltage controlled oscillator, the filter, and the amplifier to creating new and more interesting sounds. Okay, so that's about it with getting started on the Model 101 here. It's a really good machine for getting into the basics of subtractive synth. As I said earlier, the layout's really clear, the sound is really great, and it's heaps of fun to play with. Not too many controls, so it doesn't get too overwhelming too quickly. The whole system itself is a great little workstation. And if you're interested, check out the other videos where we start to bring in the 102 expander module here as well as another video where I explain how the 104 sequencer and the 103 mixer work as well. If you're interested in other videos about synths that are similar to the 101 here, I suggest having a look at the Korg MS-20 video. Again, a similar monophonic semi-modular synthesizer that has a great vintage sound and again is a pretty easy machine to get around. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoy these videos, please think about subscribing to the MES YouTube channel. We'd really appreciate it.